Last night in Kabul, the United States ended 20 years of war in Afghanistan, the longest war in American history. We completed one of the biggest airlifts in history, with more than 120,000 people evacuated to safety. That number is more than double what most experts thought were possible. No nation has ever done anything like it in all of history. Only the United States had the capacity and the will and ability to do it, and we did it today. The extraordinary success of this mission was due to the incredible skill, bravery, and selfless courage of the United States military and our diplomats and intelligence professionals.
Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. That was President Biden just a couple of hours ago touting this withdrawal as some kind of just huge success. In fact, here he is on the date itself. Watch this.
In April, I made a decision to end this war. As part of that decision, we set the date of August 31st for American troops to withdraw.
So, see, not only was the exit a success, but he was the one who determined that he ended the war. First off, you don't end a war. You either lose a war, or you have peace, or because you negotiate something, or you win a war. You don't end a war. And it's really ironic to hear someone who, during his 8 years as vice president with Obama, Biden, even going back before then when he was senator, who he voted to not only fund, but to get involved in this unlimited authorized use of military force that had us over in Afghanistan for 20 plus years, right? Not only did he fund that, not only did he agree to it, but he prosecuted it when he was vice president of the United States for 8 years. And then he further prosecuted it now, except he decided to FUBAR up the withdrawal date and ignore military counsel. No, this was not a success by any stretch of the word at all. And then he went on to blame Trump for this messy withdrawal, it was a success, but it wasn't. This was weird. Watch this.
My predecessor, the former president, signed an agreement with the Taliban to remove U.S. troops by May the 1st, just months after I was inaugurated. The previous administration's agreement said that if we stuck to the May 1st deadline that they had signed on to leave by, the Taliban wouldn't attack any American forces. But if we stayed, all bets were off. So we were left with a simple decision. Either follow through on the commitment made by the last administration and leave Afghanistan, or say we weren't leaving and commit another tens of thousands more troops going back to war. That was the choice, the real choice.
Biden says the withdrawal was a major success and that it's also all Trump's fault, and also blames Trump for a deadline that Biden himself actually extended. So according to Biden logic, wanting to plan and prepare for an evacuation is the exact same as wanting a third decade of war. Biden says that he, quote, made the decision to end this war, but he didn't. He FUBAR'd a pre-existing withdrawal plan by ignoring military counsel and screwing around with a date for a 9/11 optic. And after yelling at a nation to get off his lawn, Biden then walked away without answering any questions, of course, as he does almost every time lately. The Biden administration has orchestrated the worst drawdown to any conflict in U.S. history and ceded every gain in all territory back to the enemy, leaving hundreds of Americans behind, and he calls it a success. He only ever had two choices, really. One, own the mistake and then correct it, making sure that he didn't leave Afghanistan until every last American and Afghan ally was out. Or the second option, gaslight a nation into thinking that 13 dead servicemen and 200 dead civilians is a victory. And at every turn, they've downplayed and understated what it meant to abandon Americans and their allies and hand an entire country over to a terror group. Minimizing this horror show just helps to protect an administration that's currently crashing and burning spectacularly. So they spend all their time defending the indefensible. Case in point, a horrific video emerged yesterday. And I know everybody's still trying to figure out exactly what's happening here. But two things notable about this video. One, that's an American Black Hawk chopper. That's being flown by Taliban, which we were told they didn't know how to do unless it was someone who left the Afghan military and decided to defect over to Taliban. Now there's a man who is dangling at the end of the rope, either in a harness or something. I don't know how. I mean, it's kind of, I realize that we have a bunch of CSI video investigators on Twitter. miles wide and inches deep, smart folks. But it's really, honestly, unless you have that magical television series technology to be able to, blow that up and make it crystal clear, it's really hard to tell. But that's Taliban flying our chopper. Now, if you're a realist and you're not an apologist for this administration's disaster, I mean, you point out rightly that the Taliban can indeed, looks like, fly a Black Hawk helicopter, number one. And number two, it's typically not normal to have a dude hanging from a rope tied to a Black Hawk helicopter, dangled over a populated city. Now, some have speculated maybe it's a hostage, maybe the person dangling is an interpreter or an ally of some kind. And some reports today say that the man's fixing a flag. It's really hard to know. But that's our chopper. There's a man hanging from our chopper we all paid for, Black Hawk helicopter that the Taliban aren't supposed to know how to fly. But what does the media do with all of this? They get wrapped around the axle on stupid details in an effort to minimize what this video actually means. So you have people like Christopher Cuomo tweeting articles by the illiterate pothead outlet called Vice. Vice literally does nothing to debunk this video. They said, oh, it was debunked. He shared this. Cuomo argued with me online, sharing this with me as though this was debunked, except it's not debunked. They don't debunk anything. All they do is call everyone who shared the clip right-wing trolls, and they say that the video was taken out of context, except like the brain trust they are, they don't exactly ever explain what the context was from which it was removed. Here's an excerpt from this article that tries to downplay this. They say, quote, the video does indeed appear to show a Black Hawk helicopter being flown over an Afghan city, and there is a person dangling from the aircraft. However, even a cursory glance at the video reveals that the person is moving around and strapped into a chest harness. At one point, the person even reaches up and holds onto the rope, end quote. Now, in pure JV style, Vice goes on to say that the video was taken out of context, but again, never explains what context or how. I mean, the claim taken out of context, they think, is apparently explanation enough. All you need to know, according to Vice, is that the people who shared it on the right are right-wing trolls, so you can ignore it. These people are acting like apologists, not journalists. I mean, good job running defense for Taliban here. Nothing to see, right? They're just the Taliban out for a joyride in a taxpayer-funded Black Hawk helicopter. Everything's fine. Maybe, I don't know, dangling people from helicopters is just how the Taliban punishes people who don't state their preferred pronouns. Not only have we left many Americans behind, as well as $85 billion of military equipment, we apparently also left behind 51 contract dogs that assist with our military efforts. Now, there's a lot of debate about this, a lot of back and forth, and you know why there's a lot of back and forth? Because our State Department is garbage, and every single person that works in the State Department is garbage. And the only sufficient apology right now is to drag everyone out on their asses onto Pennsylvania Avenue, right there in front of the White House, and fire every last single damn one of them. Because we have no idea what's going on. I was talking on the phone to members of Congress last night who told me that the State Department has been non-responsive for weeks, ignoring even pleas of help from people who are in these people's districts and worked with the military in Afghanistan. Now, these are contracted service dogs, so these are not the service dogs that our men and women brought with them over from the United States, but they're military dogs that apparently assisted somehow with our military, and nobody's bothered to address this at all in the administration. So they're now left behind in Afghanistan. But if we'd leave Americans behind and allies, it's not surprising that we would leave out man's best friend too, right? The CEO of the Humane Society, Robin Ganzert, said of this tragic situation that's playing out, quote, I'm devastated by the reports that the American government is pulling out of Kabul and leaving behind brave U.S. military contract working dogs to be tortured and killed at the hand of our enemies. These brave dogs do the same dangerous, life-saving work as our military working dogs and deserve a far better fate than the one to which they've been condemned. The senseless fate is made all the more tragic as the Humane Society stands ready to not only help transport these contract canine soldiers to U.S. soil, but also provide for their lifetime medical care, end quote. I would totally take all of them, by the way. And I really don't appreciate the Pentagon and CENTCOM and DOD and everyone else, their spin on this, that, oh no, these are just animals that were with a shelter. That's essentially what they're trying to suggest here. The latest on the dogs from SPCA International is that they and their caretakers were explicitly not allowed to board military aircraft or private charter aircraft, not even the one that was pictured widely in media reports as being only half full. Allegedly, the contract dogs have been released into the airport, but again, in all the chaos, facts are hard to come by. God put a hand over my mouth. This is just another measure of how there was zero planning or preparation at all for this evacuation. And when you botch a withdrawal this badly, all that's left to minimize and downplay is the very real damage and destruction that you've left behind. And you have to constantly play apologist for evil and incompetence. And yes, even defend the Taliban. And the administration, as soon as they realized how bad this mess was going to be, they've been doing just that. Real bang-up PR job for these radical Islamic jihadists. Here's Secretary of State Antony Blinken yesterday.
The Taliban seeks international legitimacy and support. Our message is any legitimacy and any support will have to be earned. The Taliban can do that by meeting commitments and obligations on freedom of travel, respecting the basic rights of the Afghan people, including women and minorities, upholding its commitments on counterterrorism, not carrying out reprisal violence against those who choose to stay in Afghanistan, and forming an inclusive government that can meet the needs and reflect the aspirations of the Afghan people.
Sure, the Taliban are just like regular old Boy Scouts, right? I'm sure they plan on doing everything that Blinken just laid out. Of course, the Taliban did help aid and abet the greatest terror attack on U.S. soil in history, and we were bombing them 2 weeks ago. But yeah, with a little patience, by next year, they'll probably all be members of the Commission on Human Rights at the United Nations. In fact, apparently, we're going to give them American tax dollars, too. Don't you love paying your fair share and having your income stolen so that it can go to the Taliban? Here's Andrew Sullivan saying as much earlier today. Watch this.
You say we're going to work with the Taliban. Does that include the prospect of giving them aid?
Well, first of all, we do believe that there is an important dimension of humanitarian assistance that should go directly to the people of Afghanistan. They need help with respect to health and food aid and other forms of subsistence, and we do intend to continue that.
And correction, that was not Sullivan, that was Ned Price. Ned Price, as you know, who has jackets that are too big for him. And I'm sure that the Taliban, because they're such a responsible governing agency, I'm sure they're going to hand all of your American taxpayer money right over to the starving people of Afghanistan, because that's the kind of stand-up guys they are, right? Bleeding hearts and philanthropists, people who sometimes dangle others from helicopters and beat women publicly for not having their faces covered. In any case, playing down the inhumanity of leaving service dogs behind and the evil of the Taliban isn't all this really administration's been up to. They're also downplaying the number of Americans left behind. It's just a few hundred. It's in the low hundreds, guys. That's all John Kirby says. Watch.
I don't think there's an exact figure, Willie. We believe we got the vast majority of American citizens out, something to the tune of 6,000 of them. And we think it's probably in the low hundreds that are still there.
Low hundreds. That's a great measure of success. Do you remember, by the way, when we lost, just upwards of under 20 men going and getting, because we couldn't leave one person left behind, the traitor Bo Bergdahl. Do you remember how many men's lives we spent rescuing that traitor from the Taliban? And we traded the 5 people who are running the Taliban operations right now over in Kabul. But now the new measure has been set, abandoning low hundreds of Americans. That's the new measure of success, guys. Bang up job by the Biden administration. And the administration's getting quite adept at pretending that leaving Americans behind is really no big deal. It happens all the time, says John Kirby. Take a look.
How does diplomacy get those people out of the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan?
It's not completely unlike the way we do it elsewhere around the world. I mean, we have Americans that get stranded in countries all the time.
You know, if I had the job John Kirby does, I probably would make the expression that I stepped on a Lego in my bare feet all the time as he does. No, but see, here's the thing. The fantasy that this administration must engage in order to downplay the abject disaster they caused in Afghanistan, they have to minimize and analogize and then lie about it and then strawman and then do it all over again whenever new horrific details emerge from Afghanistan highlighting this complete incompetency. This is White House spokesperson Jen Psaki doing exactly this on August 23rd. Let's just flash back to remember this little exchange that she had with Peter Doocy and the way in which they prefer to refer to Americans left behind by the Biden administration. Don't say stranded. Watch.
First of all, I think it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded. They are not.
Yeah, Peter Doocy, which we were all there for the Doocy question, stated the obvious, the fact that Americans are stranded behind enemy lines. And it was very important to Psaki last week that those abandoned Americans not be referred to as such. They're not abandoned, nor are they stranded. They're just Americans incapable of rejoining America at the moment because they're involuntarily surrounded by Taliban and ISIS-K, who are still working on their inclusivity skills. And by Taliban, I mean the Islamic Emirates. That's the Instagram-friendly terror group name now. Americans, they're not stranded. It's just irresponsible, apparently, to suggest otherwise. I love how they're focused more on semantics than they are getting lives out. And that apparently is how this administration rolls. Word games, semantic gymnastics, playing apologists for Taliban. I mean, these people love to talk about decency and empathy and leaving nobody behind, but they'll be damned if they live up to any of it. I'll show you what I mean. Take a look at the saccharine, schmaltzy, feel-good blather from Biden back in 2019. He was criticizing the Trump administration. And I want you to think about his words in the context of his administration's handling of the Afghan drawdown. Watch.
And it really is about, sort of reweaving that social fabric that holds a society together. Honesty, decency, hope, leaving nobody behind, giving hate no safe harbor. We don't always live up to it, but that's who we are. That's who we are. And it's the thing that holds us together. And I don't see much of it coming from the far right and the Breitbarts of the world and this administration.
Honesty, decency, hope, leaving nobody behind. Biden's failed every single standard that he just laid out for what makes a good and decent America. Our president, like all Democrats, is big on these empathetic words, but can't be bothered to live them out. He talks about maintaining the social fabric while his policies rip it apart. There aren't enough soothing, therapeutic, and semantic language games in the world to undo what this administration has done. So to close, there's one trapped Afghan interpreter, actually a couple. One story isn't so positive, named Mohammed. 13 years ago, Mohammed helped rescue then Senator Joe Biden and two other senators who were stranded in a remote Afghanistan valley after their helicopter was forced to land in a snowstorm. Now Mohammed is asking President Biden to save him. He pleaded on Twitter, he pleaded on social media, asking President Biden, quote, "Hello, Mr. President, save me and my family. Don't forget me here." It seems Mohammed's visa application got stuck and his record somehow got lost, and he's trapped in Afghanistan. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew R. Till wrote this in June to support Mohammed's application for a special immigrant visa, saying, quote, "His selfless service to our military men and women is just the kind of service I wish more Americans displayed," end quote. Biden apparently forgot about it. I don't know, maybe he has memory problems. You know who else was there, interestingly enough? Anthony Blinken. I guess he forgot too. Biden talked about leaving nobody behind in that August 2019 interview that we played, but it looks like he's left interpreter Mohammed, the very man who helped get him out of Afghanistan, left him behind. And another family left behind? Wall Street Journal today has this heartbreaking story of one family. And the man, Obedullah Amin, an interpreter for over a decade, worked with U.S. forces and served alongside them. Retired Marines helped Mr. Amin and his family preserve their documentation and obtain that golden ticket, a congressional letter affirming his work with U.S. Armed Forces. Mr. Amin was to take that and his wife and his two children to the Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul. And the Amins carefully navigated around ISIS-K, Taliban, and finally, with their hearts in their throats, they made it through that first Taliban checkpoint. You know, that was one of the checkpoints that we could have controlled when we could have run those checkpoints, the perimeter outside the airport in the city, but the administration refused. And the reason we have so many Americans and Afghan allies left behind is because the administration allowed the Taliban to control those checkpoints, leading to gates. Many special forces and Marines were saying that people were being turned away. Well, the Amins made it through that checkpoint, and they followed the advice of their now retired Marine friends who told them to hold signs up with a numerical code that would alert Marines at the gate to pass them through faster, to identify them and get them through. The Amins were so close to getting inside. But at that moment, at the Abbey Gate, a suicide bomber detonated 25 pounds of explosives and killed everyone in the vicinity. our 13 service members and Afghan allies like Obaidullah Amin and his wife and his 2 small children. Despite being feet away from the gate, with signs held over their heads, clutching that golden ticket, they never made it. Mutual friends of Amin and retired vet Andrew Darlington, who spoke with the Wall Street Journal, said that the last time one person who was there, and he was not giving his name up because he's still in hiding from the Taliban, but he had let Darlington know that the last time that he saw the Amins, Obaidullah and his wife Marion, were standing side by side, their numerical signs over their heads right there at Abbey Gate. But at least we have no more mean tweets. We have a lot more coming up for you, and we're going to get into all of the latest developments. As you know, we have hundreds of Americans still trapped in Afghanistan, a lot of allies. Tom Amenta is going to be joining us next. He's a former Army Ranger and co-author of the 20-Year War. He helps us break it down. Stay with us. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. They develop their explosive roast profiles with the same mission and focus that they learned while serving our great nation. And with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. In 2020, they donated over 6 million cups of coffee to veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. Their high-quality coffee beans are imported from all over the world, from Colombia and Brazil, and carefully roasted at their facilities in Tennessee and Utah. They even have a signature roast called Lava Panther, which is awesome. Comes from a small farm in Guatemala. Should also be a metal band name. So although temperatures are cooling off, don't forget to keep enjoying that great outdoors, fueled by Black Rifle Coffee. And the best way to do that is by joining the Black Rifle Coffee Club. When you join, your chosen brew is roasted, packaged, and shipped free to your door. And you can get special discounts, access to exclusive products, and a lot more. You can purchase at blackriflecoffee.com/Dana. Use code Dana at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first Coffee Club order. The withdrawal from Afghanistan has proven to be a total disaster. Americans, allies, and even contracted service dogs have been left behind to fend for themselves against the Taliban. My next guest is a retired Army Ranger and co-author of The 20-Year War, Tom Amenta, and he joins us now. Tom, thanks so much for joining me and for your service and for your continued voice. I just have to get your reaction to the president's, not really press conference, but his address to the nation. What did you make of that?
Anyone who can call something an extraordinary success, well, already having had his administration admit that we've left Americans behind that, quote, wanted to leave, we'll get to that one hopefully a little bit later. I don't understand how you even possibly, whoever his speechwriter was, how did you even put that in the draft? Extraordinary success and leaving Americans behind.
Oh, I think we lost your sound here for just a second. Oh, there we go. Actually, you wanna stop it? We'll just pick it up. Because you went silent. We're live to tape, so you don't have to worry about it. Thankfully, it's not live.
So sorry about that. My AirPods.
No, you're good. If you want to pick it up from, we could just edit it, put up a full screen. We could just put anything that they call a success.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leaving Americans behind.
Yeah. All right.
You're good, whatever. Oh wait.
All right. Yeah.
Dana wants you to re-ask the question.
John does?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. So, Tom, I have to ask you, just to start, what is your reaction to the president's press address that he had just a little earlier?
Anyone who can call this an extraordinary success, well, already having an administration that admits that we left Americans behind, that, quote, wanted to leave, and hopefully we get to that a little later. Who's a speechwriter, and how did that even get into the draft? Because that's abhorrent. That is absolutely not in keeping with anything we do here in the United States. That is antithetical to the American way. He thinks it's an extraordinary success that we left Americans behind.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And
I'm trying to understand too, Tom, when they keep going back to this phrase, like people who choose to remain behind. I don't know anyone that's chosen to remain behind, but I do know people who weren't able to get through Taliban checkpoints because Taliban was apparently turning away some Americans and Afghan allies.
So let me give you an example of that, actually. And this is something that I dealt with in the real world. So there was a gentleman who has an American passport. And the only family that he had was his 16-year-old little brother. But his little brother didn't have papers to go to the United States. So until I was able to talk to some people, and some friends of his were able to talk to people and connect them and realize that his little brother could in fact come with him to the United States as immediate family, he was prepared to stay in Afghanistan to take care of his little brother. So when the administration is trying to use this people who want to leave as a get out of jail free card, what they're talking about is people that are making the choice of, do I bring my little brother? And I'm the oldest of four. Okay, this one hits me really personally. Or do I stay? My elderly parents, right? Can they come with me, or am I going to stay to try and take care of them and accept that risk? And listen, this is not the American culture, and I understand that, but some of these men and, were trying to make the decision of, they have multiple wives with a lot of kids on a passport. Was their entire family going to come, or are they going to have to choose between those parties in their household? Like, I know that's a little foreign to America, but this is some of the decisions that were being made. And this is what was being said of, like, if you want to come, well, how are you going to make that choice? Like, how are you going to, I can't fathom being in the uncomfortable position of having to say, hi, sorry, little bro, gotta bounce, or accepting the risk of living under Taliban rule.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking that any of those decisions I was reading about. I mean, the Wall Street Journal had a piece that they published this afternoon that got into one family that had they were able to safekeep their documents. The Taliban couldn't get them and destroy them, and they had a congressional letter, and it was getting into the code, the numerical code that they would use just to get through and have Marines identify them. I read a quote from one Marine who had returned and said it was like playing God. You're picking and choosing which people that you're bringing into. I can't imagine how that weighs on these service members who are coming back and having lived through that.
I can't imagine what it would be like to do that, Dana. I stand in awe of those men and women. How? That's a mission that the military isn't trained for. I've watched the pictures, and I've seen this, and you've got to say yes, you to these people that are just desperate to be free, that they know it's coming, that you have so many of these people that were waiting 10 years for a visa, right? 10 years. And this is one of those things that I really want to highlight to people, because I understand that there's also the thing that it seems like the Biden administration is pushing some of these people to the United States too quickly. And that is absolutely a security concern. And that is absolutely something that the administration has to not only wear, but address to prove that they are properly taking all the time that they need to make everyone comfortable that we have the right people coming, because it was that chaotic. But most of these people, the overwhelming majority, they're friends. They're people that built relationships with Americans for 20 years. It's not like, there was the gate got open and it was a bum rush. And it was like, okay, 122,000, that's the number. Bye, everyone else. Like, you had so many people, like, just because I know Tim Kennedy, and he's been very public that he was over there. Like, you think Tim was just going to be like, you, and you? No. Like, these are known entities to Americans for the most part. I'm not going to say that someone didn't sneak in. I am not going to say that you don't have to, again, properly vet, but that's why we flew him to Germany. That's why we flew him to Doha, right? So if you're unsure, keep them there until you're sure. If you are sure and they have the paperwork and they have a dozen Americans vouching for them, like so many of them do, then thank them for their service to this country too.
Right.
In harm's way. You hear stories about girls, school teachers, women that are going to teach little girls grammar school getting beheaded by the Taliban. Like, that story's been around since we went there. And you're going to tell me that woman
reading
doesn't
stories
serve?
reading stories too about fathers who are worried that and actually considering having to maim their daughters because they're terrified that they're going to be taken as jihadi brides.
Yes.
As parents, I can imagine just grasping something like that. But that's the reality that they're dealing with. And then, of course, we were talking a little bit earlier about Biden's own interpreter, who apparently is now being left behind there as well. Let me ask you this, Tom. The president had said there was no other way this could have been done. There was no more planning that could have gone into this. There was no more preparation that could have gone into this. This was one of the things that he was discussing during his address to the nation, which I find from what I can tell from your expression and everyone else that I've talked to, that's not. What's the truth on that? That sounds not true.
So in the military, you plan for the best case, you plan for the most likely case, and you plan for the worst case. The pictures that you're showing right now and the amount of American weapons that they're holding, can you please explain to me how that isn't the worst case and how that was part of the plan? It's just absurd to me that they're even gonna try and pretend to say that. Again, he thought it went extraordinarily well. And one of the other sound bites that he had was that there was, quote, unanimous consensus from the senior leaders and the Joint Chiefs of Staff to hold to our airlift schedule. The question that I want to know, Dana, is who created the airlift schedule on the first place, and why was it implemented the way that it was? Because there's no way they planned for the worst case. And being around a lot of people that worked in NGOs for the past 2 weeks, people that, reporters who have been on the ground there, fellow veterans, former intel people, some former State Department people have all gone to the private sector. I find it so fascinating that every person in those groups have little bits and pieces, little snapshots of how the worst case could have happened. And if I can hear those through that, and those people exist and they're able to speak, or the senior people in all those organizations are able to speak the administration, which they do, I don't know how they didn't put that together or at least consider it, right?
Yeah.
There was no planning for the worst case scenario here.
And it's awful to see. And of course, they're showing the huge assortment of weapons that they were able to get. They said that, I think, what was the number? Like 27 of our armored vehicles were demilitarized, but that doesn't include the 22,000 other ones that apparently nobody did anything with. I have two other final questions for you, Tom. First off, clarify for us, because one of the other stories that we're reading about, of course, the awfulness and the heartbreak of abandoning, making them stranded, these Afghan allies and other Americans. But the service dogs, I know there's a difference between, and I let your dog go because I love dogs. I am a dog nut and never apologize for that, because that he's just chiming in, or she's just chiming in.
She is.
I know there's a difference between, love it. I know there's a difference between military dogs that our servicemen and women bring with them, and then the contract dogs also that are sometimes used in different countries. The ones that we keep reading about those are the contract dogs, correct? Not that their lives aren't any more or less valuable.
No, I understand that. I mean, Dana, if you want to have me on some other time and we can talk the dogs and all of that, let's set that up. I just think that what we need to be talking about right now, and given the gravity of what we just heard from this administration, if we are calling something an extraordinary success and we are going all the way down, we've talked about the human cost, we've talked about the material and equipment, and now we're trying to talk about the next level of this. Like, it feels like we're just, I don't even want to say piling on. Like, it's just, we've just made the case when open, shut, and done, how much this is screwed up. And it's like, I got feels and I got opinions, but I think that what I really want to communicate, and I think is even more important, is it's not about the little bit or the little piece, whether it's the men that we left behind that are actually America's men and women, whether it's the Afghans, whether it's the dogs, whether it's whomever. It's that this administration fundamentally screwed this up. That they
And my question, and just to clarify, my question to you on that wasn't actually to get into it. It was just because I'm kind of curious about the accuracy and veracity of some of the reporting that's out there. So that's why I'm like, who are the people that can actually kind of speak to this? Because there's, as you know, I mean, fog of war, you have fog of information. And this is kind of the same thing. Last thing before we go, the 20-year war, your book, and that really, I mean, I feel like there's going to be a movie that's going to be made about this experience and this 20-year war, because you have, I mean, my oldest son was 6 months old when on 9/11, and 20 years later, I mean, you've had an entire generation of kids that have grown up, and as I've said earlier, they grew up in peace and not knowing terror alert levels because of the sacrifice of people who did their mission, the boots that did their job in Afghanistan. Tell me a little bit about your book.
So the book is highlighting 71 individual veteran stories, starting from Sergeant Major of the Army Tilley, who was at the Pentagon on 9/11, all the way through December of 2020, or is the length of time that these stories go through. It's a huge, as you can see it behind me, it's a huge portrait book. It's 12 inches by 12 inches, and the first thing you do is a gorgeous portrait of who these veterans are. Their stories are what inspired them to serve, this great nation, a brief sketch of their service, what their transition to civilian life was like, and then finally what they're doing now to continue to serve this country and to continue to make it the greatest place in the world. Just because, I mentioned him earlier, but Tim Kennedy's in it, and he talks very frankly about his evolution as a human being and how the military was good for that. We have entrepreneurs in the book. We have high-level, business people in the private sector. We have, people that are continuing to serve in the government. It is a wonderful snapshot of what, inspires people to serve and how they chose to go on to make America the greatest place in the world.
There you go. The 20-Year War is the book. Tom Amenta, thank you so much for your service and your book as well. I can't wait to look at it. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dana.
Of course. All right, folks, it looks like Al-Qaeda got the band back together. Of course, they were always kind of together. They just didn't really have Afghanistan as their main Airbnb, right? Well, they're back in Afghanistan. And up next, we have Lieutenant General William Boykin, who's going to help us break it down. What does that mean? What does that mean also for terror alerts? Stay with us. How much equity do you have in your home? Cybercrime experts are alerting homeowners that the more equity you have, the greater chance criminals could target you. Home title theft is one of the fastest growing crimes, and Home Title Lock, America's leader in home title protection, is warning homeowners that they could already potentially, they could potentially be a victim, not even know it really. Here's how. Cyber thieves search hundreds of public databases for high equity homes. They find your home's online title, can forge your signature stating that you sold your home, and then take out loans and using your equity. Insurance, common identity theft programs, none of these things are going to cover you. Protect your most valuable asset. Register your address to see if you could be a victim and receive a complete title history of your home, a $100 value for free. Visit HometitleLock.com. So Al-Qaeda is back in Afghanistan, and the threat of another terror attack in America now increases by the day. Lieutenant General William Boykin is an original member of the U.S. Army Delta Force, former commander of Army Green Berets, and executive vice president of the Research Council. Lieutenant General Boykin now joins us to discuss the rising terror threat that we are facing now as a result of this disastrous withdrawal. Lieutenant General, such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for your service and your reasoned perspective on this. Heaven knows that we need it now more than ever.
Thank you very much, Dana. Glad to be with you.
Of course. I'm sure you, as everyone else, saw these headlines and video and photos of Al-Qaeda returning celebratory, going right back to Kabul. And I realized that our original purpose was to decentralize Taliban, stop it from being this launch pad, Afghanistan, for terror attacks around the world. But now it seems we're right back at square one, and maybe even in a worse position because we've armed Taliban. Al-Qaeda has seen that we're really not going to enforce any kind of, we're not even going to help our allies out. And then furthermore, we don't have any really eyes or ears on the ground that can actually give us information at this point because of how everything was done during the withdrawal. What does this mean for concern about terror attacks here at home now? Because they have this and more, we're back at square one.
And I think that what we see right now is that Afghanistan is a perfect place for not only Al-Qaeda, but other terror groups, to move right back in, establish these safe havens once again, and operate from there. And they have a home there now because they know the Americans are not going back in there. And this over-the-horizon capabilities that we allegedly have, well, tell me where they're going to operate from. Tell me where they're going to operate from, especially if they're talking about boots on the ground. Any of those border countries there, Uzbekistan, Iran, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, any of those going to give you a place to operate from? I doubt it very seriously. So you're talking about some long-range, over-the-horizon capabilities, if there really is any such thing. And as you said, Dana, the fact that we don't have allies on the ground in there now that would be willing to trust us and give us information or intelligence, that puts us in an even worse situation than we were before.
Yeah, and to even launch any kind of, even to drop just a team of people in, just to kind of surveil and do some reconnaissance. I mean, I'm not even sure how that would happen because, as you mentioned, the countries that are surrounding, not very hospitable to something like that. We don't have any nearby bases. There's no, water. I mean, it's really incredibly remote, just to say the least. There's just no way. I don't see any feasible way we could do anything like that.
No, I don't either. And keep this in mind. When we went into Afghanistan in 2001, remember that the CIA had been in there and had remained in there, had maintained a presence and connections with the Northern Alliance and other elements there. So we had something to fall in on. When we went in and actually linked up with those forces and began to take back city after city after city, we were doing so with the help of the CIA's network that had been created in there. We don't have a network like that anymore. That's gone. And there will never be another one in Afghanistan, and I doubt if any other place in the world, because they don't trust us, because of the way we left there and because of the way we walked away from an obligation that we made, a serious obligation. We are no longer considered a reliable or trustworthy ally.
Yeah, and to your point, sir, as well, you mentioned the Northern Alliance, and I was seeing on some social media some of the leftover armored vehicles and from when in Panjshir Valley when they were fighting with the Russians, and they had said that they're against Taliban. We know that. We know that the son of Massoud, who was apparently, I think, assassinated in 2005, he's I think the figurehead for that cause. But it does seem like their numbers are small. Not quite sure they could extend that beyond Panjshir Valley. But does this mean that Afghanistan pretty much at this point is kind of reduced back to that loose network of different tribal clans, but with the Taliban essentially running large? I really don't think that Anthony Blinken's wish of seeing them form, I think what he called it, an inclusive government, really don't think that that's going to come to pass.
No, that's wishful thinking on behalf of our Secretary of State. Look, I think that what you potentially could see is you could see a civil war in there now with those that are up in the Panjshir Valley now, that are up there arming themselves and trying to prepare for a battle. That battle may come, but I would tell you that if you look at the imam now that has come back out of exile and has taken over, if you go back and look at that guy's record, that guy was a hardcore literal interpretation Sharia guy. And he is the one that believes that the women must be treated as second-class citizens. He's the one that, in fact, was responsible previously for the killing of women out on the parade fields or the soccer fields, as we saw before we went in the last time. This guy is a hardcore Islamist. And if you think for 1 minute that they're going to have a government that is inclusive, especially inclusive of women, that's just foolishness. It's nonsense.
Yeah. Last question for you, sir. Do we, I mean, obviously, I think our concerns about any kind of now, we have to think about domestic terror attacks again because of everything that's happened. Obviously, I think that's kind of back on the table for consideration. What do you see in terms of the likelihood of this happening again in the next, several years, maybe even in the next decade?
Oh, I think it's a sure thing. They'll come after us. Now, whether we are sophisticated enough and have any way to stop it is to be determined. But they will come after us again. They're going to come after us. And one of the things that I worry about is the people that were evacuated without the proper vetting. How many of those are going to wind up in the United States and be in a position to assist maybe an element that is operating out of Afghanistan, and then they've got boots on the ground to assist them on the inside of the United States. That concerns me a great deal.
Very much so. Boy, we have a lot to deal with now coming up as a result of all of this. We'll be paying the price for this for a long time to come. Lieutenant General William Boykin, always a pleasure with FRC Family Research Council. Great group. Appreciate all y'all do. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Mm-hmm. Democrats have been very busy getting to the real business of America. While we're all dealing and talking about Afghanistan, the squad and everyone else, they want a chief diversity officer. They want to get rid of the Fed chairman. They want a chief diversity officer for Justice Department. They want a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with the national security. We'll talk to you about that next. Stay with us. Well, because Democrats are a very serious group of people that wake up each day to solve real problems, not imaginary ones, they have a great big new idea. We need more diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's right. I know you thought they'd be focused on the hurricane down in Louisiana or the collapse of Afghanistan, but folks, you'd be wrong. Here's a quote from the White House's statement on this noble and important effort for the Department of Justice. Quote, today's executive order will help develop a federal workforce that looks like America, where qualified people from every background and walk of life have an equal opportunity to serve our nation, end quote. Last time I checked, the only thing that might stop you from getting a job with the government these days is being just, a MAGA voter, wear a red hat, be a white male, or even adjacent. I don't even know what that means, do you? Or even worse, being a conservative, regardless of your color or gender. So what's the deal with this new chief diversity officer role for the Justice Department? Well, here's one more from the job posting. It reads this. It says, quote, the chief diversity officer, the CDO, guys, will lead and coordinate the department's diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, initiatives. The CDO will work to ensure that DEIA remains a priority in the department and prioritize an organizational channel for department-wide accountability, end quote. I fell asleep halfway through their description. Well, anyone who's worked in a major corporation knows what that whole diversity, equity, and inclusion means, right? It's a scam. It's a Marxist scam. It's about creating an office where you're imposing and enforcing far left Marxist, institutionalized Marxist racism. That's how this works. And so when they say diversity, they mean diversity of certain identities, but they're not talking about viewpoint diversity. So a person is actually going to be reduced to things that everything that they look like, what they look like, that's not what they think and not what they say. So a person of color will only count as authentically diverse if they're on the left. And inclusion, that means that's the exclusion of anyone who isn't progressive, regardless of your skin color and gender. And equity, who isn't for fairness? But equity, as they define it, that has nothing to do with fairness. It's about employing discrimination and reallocating resources in the name of creating equal outcomes, regardless of free will to get to outcome. And there's another name for that, by the way, Marxism. But this new term is DEI, and it's just a Trojan horse that's going to allow for a Marxist institutionalized racism and a political takeover of the DOJ. And that's what DEI does to every single institution it touches. Do you remember when Trump said everything woke touches turns to? Well, he was right. Meanwhile, as the leftists march through our institutions like the DOJ continues, you have the squad, Ocasio-Cortez, Tlaib, Presley. They had another collective, they all got together and shared a brain cell. And their big idea was to get rid of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and replace him with somebody more like teenage Greta Thunberg. I don't know. They said they want to see someone at the helm who's more aggressive on financial regulation and climate change. Probably go after crypto too. So the Fed chair's job should now be focused on climate change, according to the squad. I'm not kidding, because here's what they had to say about current Fed chair Jerome Powell. Quote, under his leadership, Federal Reserve has taken very little action to mitigate the risk climate change poses to our financial system at a time when Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change is warning of potential catastrophic and irreversible damage inflicted by changing climate. Oh my gosh, I want to choke to death on this word salad, end quote. Okay, they didn't say that last part. Just dissolve the Fed altogether. How about that? So take heart, America. Your DOJ, which never gets to the bottom of the Russian hoax or anything else, Now, they're not going to focus on bringing down the price of a gallon of gas, but they want to make it more expensive so you'll stop emitting greenhouse gases. So in other words, the Fed chair, who already has the job of managing a national debt of $30 trillion, is going to be responsible for global warming. Why don't you just absolve all of it? That's my idea. All right, folks, that does it for us tonight. We're going to get through the craziness together. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.